The Knights offered to hand the capital back to the Jade Falcon Expeditionary. Of course, there's a Batrep, so you can see about how truthful either side was in those negotiations. Welcome back to Afrin, homeworld of the Jade Falcon Expeditionary, or at least the FOB for the Jade Falcon forces in the area. This has proven to be an opportune time to allow the forces from Alpha Cluster to redeem their honor and retake the capital after their disgraceful action against the T-Rex Society. Our buddy Memphis Mark, his immenseness himself, ruler of the Knights Husseini, offered to give the Jade Falcon Expeditionary their capital back, and that is quite a respectable offer, very generous considering the amount of failures of the last Jade Falcon commands that were in the area. But I had a rough idea what he was up to, and so did he. We both called it out on it for being what it was, and now he even offered to bring his pork pie hat and wear it during the engagement, just to kind of chew on the curd that is the double-blind buffoonery that was occurring in the situational movement of the strategic commands. This matchup should be considerably more fair, as we now have a dug-in Intersphere company and a half, maybe two, it's very vague in these strategic rules, facing off against 3 commands from the Jade Falcon. But unfortunately, I had situated all the commands in a very broad manner to control the entire planet and bottleneck him in so that I can force him to engage on the capital and push him off once and for all. Otherwise, I'd have to chase him down over the course of a couple campaign turns. As such, there's a slight caveat to our force list. We're not going to be able to get everything on the board immediately. Instead, we're going to have to wait a little so that the other commands can rally what forces they have and put them on the board. In this case, the BV allotment for those reinforcements is going to be 1 lone Hellstar. A fantastic design, I love it. But there's a catch to this Hellstar. Much like most of these other campaign games, there's a lot of, conditional objectives that you have to take. And in this case, the Hellstar pilot is some elite knucklehead. And he's taking forever to get to the fight. I just assumed that he didn't know how to turn the freaking mech on, but he will arrive on turn 5. And as the game has begun, you can already see the Jade Falcon play in effect as we have grouped up all our units into one concise little area as the Bane 3, Rifleman 2C, and Locust 2C escort each other, all second-line mechs, to benefit the reduced nature of the honorability of this certainly Desgra unit. Meanwhile, the Knights have spread themselves out fairly widely, as we have the Awesome on the northern end of the board with a Bushwhacker, and on the eastern side of the board, on the right, you can see a Bushwhacker, a Glory tank, and a Arrow platform sitting there in the woods, giving vital protection to the Knights' forces. But all is not quiet in the skies above as the Visigoth Sea thunders forward and tries to gain position. Having lost initiative in the air war, it decides to play it very safely. I considered jinking during the turn to try to evade any kind of oncoming shots, but instead I decided to go gun to gun, let's get this done. And he slides along the side of the board trying to put himself into an advantageous position for the next turn. Meanwhile, he ends up losing a large pulse laser through crits in the exchange as the passing fighters begin putting themselves into a position to try to take each other down. Again, we're going to try to remove as much avenue of fire as we can, and the Bane begins plopping all kinds of smoke down. I highly suggest that whenever you have a Bane 3 or anything with that amount of ammo bins, just to vary it up a little. In this case, we're just trying to keep any kind of surprise shenanigans from long-range shots to a minimum. I don't have a whole lot of armor to deal with right now, so I need to save what I got. Jade Falcon forces begin pushing up through the smoke, trying to take as much cover as they can, while the infantry huff it next to the mechs. Thank goodness the mechs are slow, but since they're all second-line mechs, they have nothing to hold on to on their way in, so they're moving as fast as the infantry. Again, this is really scary for the Locust, because he benefits from having a high movement mod, but in this case he's just going to hang around in the smoke and hope for the best, or at least hope the air support doesn't try to single him out. Visigoth continues dueling into the air and manages to do quite a bit of damage to the lighter inner sphere fighter, but he doesn't manage to do any kind of consistent damage, or at least nothing to put it down. It's still any man's game in the air war. Meanwhile, on the ground, artillery strike starts ranging in from the 2 artillery pieces that the knights have brought to the field, and they manage to splash wildly inaccurately. And while that is occurring, their strike fighter thunders onto the ground, all, I think, 95 odd tons of it crashing through the atmosphere. Again, we now have a target, because he's just strafing into 2 anti-aircraft platforms as the Bane 3 turns, pans its weapons, gets target lock, and the Hags off of the Rifleman 2C pans and gets its target, and they start riddling the fighter full of holes, hitting it over and over and over again, but the impervious armor of that thing lets it live for another day. It's worth noting that we do use most of the advanced AA rules, so we're hitting him with a bunch of 5-pointers. It's not going to cause a threshold, nor is it going to cause a control check, so we just got to keep hitting that thing. However terrifying that fighter is, it has an improved heavy Gauss rifle on it, and that seems impressive when you can think about the damage potential, but he can't hit the broadside of a Bard with it. It manages to kick up the dirt nearby, and he flies off almost ineffectually, damaging the Bane 3 just a little, but not doing anything worth considerable pause for attention. At this point, again, this is regarding some of the scenario rules, the Locust 2C decides, hey, I'm going to go honor duel. It's okay, there's worse things that could happen in terms of mission objectives, but it decides to honor duel the bushwhacker out there in the open, and decides to start hauling oats out there to take care of it. We'll see how that goes. It could be worse. But I don't want to engage Mark head on, so the Rifleman 2C starts backing off and starts panning around to cover the rear arc of the Bane 3 and just, let the smoke do what it can. I don't want to engage the Awesome in particular until I've neutralized the artillery and other support assets in the woods over there. Meanwhile, in the skies above, the Lancer and the Visigoth tumble out of control. This causes a significant problem, particularly for me, since the Visigoth almost went off the board in uncontrolled movement, and my opponent here was gracious enough to allow me to count half hexes for him to be able to turn around and come back, in which he just barely does. Artillery continues to rain in on the field as, again, he hasn't changed the objective, or at least the sighting point. And in this case, he has a couple rounds land and nobody can see where it went. By just a quirk of how the hex line of sight thing works in this game, it's hilarious. I mean, I'm sure somebody saw the plume of an explosion, but they're not quite sure what it was. In the air above, recovering from this tumbling effect, the Visigoth begins giving 1-2 to the lighter Lancer fighter and does quite a few damage. It rips it up, but doesn't quite put it down. It's a shame. There's a lot of control rolls going on, but he manages to make nearly all of them. Jade Falcon Command begins reconsidering their situation as the reinforcements are about to arrive, so we start moving the assault mechs back up and forward. We're going to try to counter anything that the Knights decide to attempt, because we're losing the initiative here. Again, his forces are still a little separate. We can see 2 distinct elements. If we can start isolating one and trying to put a little bit of pressure on them, hopefully we can put it out of commission before we have to deal with everything at the same time. This iconic battle mech was used in all the armies. Can you guess what it is? That's right, it's the Crab! This mech was actually instrumental in actually helping the Draconis Combine win their War of 3039. It was also in the inventory of the clans, quite prominently for a while. And almost like clockwork, the Knights begin moving forward, thundering across the field. The Glory tank decides that it's going to come and get some as it tries to rush open into the open field, while the Jade Falcon assets are still sitting in reserve. Unbeknownst to Jade Falcon Command, we had some sympathizers in the city, or at least the Knights really didn't like that building, so he sent a Griffin off to take care of it, earning himself an objective point. destroying the building and allowing just a little bit more time for the Jade Falcons to make do on whatever threat they're presenting by assaulting the capital once again. As the Hellstar begins making its way onto the field, we now are in a position of local superiority on the southern end of the board. We begin moving the Bane 3 up and forward to take on the various inner sphere elements up there, let the Rifleman 2C hunker behind through cover in such a way that it's not going to receive a whole lot of shots. We're no longer hiding behind the smoke, we're going to move forward and we're going to hit as hard as we can. Meanwhile, almost completely uncontrolled, the Locust 2C begins its honor duel. He screams, "I'm honoring you to the death," and starts thundering around the building. Bushwhacker pilot says, "What?" And then nothing but ammo explosions ricochet around the poor Bushwhacker as the Locust gets just enough damage into its left torso rear, blows out its ammo bins, and puts it down. He didn't even see it coming. Yeah, we mentioned that it was like this black alley mauling. It just kind of came out of nowhere, but we're just calling it a Code Musashi sort of honor. That's apparently how he won a lot of his duels. Apparently, I actually don't really know. But it works for me. Meanwhile, in the skies above, the Visigoth earns his stripes as he swings behind the Deathstalker, opens up with all his remaining guns, and blows out the aft of the Deathstalker, sending it hurtling into flaming confetti. Strike one for the Visigoth. This is a pretty disastrous turn for Mark. He lost a Bushwhacker through nothing other than blind luck, and the Deathstalker went down through combined arms fire over a couple of turns from anti-aircraft support and the Visigoth just picking at it. And it couldn't hit the broadside of a barn. It brought that improved heavy Gauss rifle, and it was really terrifying whenever it was rolling for it, and he missed every time. He could not hit the aerospace fighters. He could not hit the ground. He could not hit the broadside of a barn if a Mennonite was guiding him. It was crazy, because the two hit mods were often hitting on 5s or 6s. Awesome begins moving around the building, thundering forward under its immense frame. It's going to try to support the tanks and the Bushwhacker that is out there. This is going to be the final moments. If the Knights can turn this around, this is going to be when it happens, and I'm not having any of it. The Locust 2C sees his opportunity, moves forward, gets into its rear arc. It's not going to do much by practice because the Awesome just has so much armor back there. And meanwhile, the main assets of the Jade Falcon Expeditionary begins moving forward into the open field. We're going to crush the Fury and the Bushwhacker just as quickly as we can so that it will just be an engagement between the Hellstar, Bane, and Rifleman against just an Awesome. And the Locust can help if he feels like it. You know, no pressure there. And in the skies above, the Inner Sphere Lancer begins climbing, trying to get away, having lost several altitudes in a turn before, trying to get up and away. The Visigoth manages to have lost a couple of altitudes himself, turns around, thrusts up in a corkscrew pattern, gets behind the Lancer, and starts filling it full of holes. And the Lancer ends up taking something like 4 control rolls in the turn, and immediately starts plummeting into the ground. Crash 2, splash another one for the Visigoth. On the ground, shots are being traded en masse as he begins focusing fire on the Bane 3. It is a nice platform. He should probably put it down, because for an assault mech, it always feels like it has thinner armor than it necessarily should, or at least for the amount of firepower that it's going to put down. Rifleman 2C moves forward way ahead of the rest of the units, only because he's trying to get a side shot, trying to get that hag off on the Fury, trying to get some sort of motive crit. He fires, he takes down a bunch of trees, but does not take down the Glory. Bane 3, however, follows up with a salvo from those 8 LRM-15s and crits the motive system, putting it into an immobilization status and causing the vehicle crew to abandon. Hoorah! Another kill for the Jade Falcon. Admittedly, it was kind of a lucky shot. This is about when he decides to call it. He is actually well past the threshold that we usually call a game at about 50%. And there was just no real recovering from that. At this point, the Jade Falcon Expeditionary had lost, what, a large pulse laser off of the Visigoth? Everything else was fine. There was a little bit of armor damage here and there. I would have probably called it in Mark's position too, because he had lost well over half his stuff, and there was just no room to fix that. To be fair though, the dice were kind of in my favor on this one. But this has been an Ouchies Batrep, and thanks for watching. In the campaign game, he's actually doing pretty okay. The forces that he committed to this defense, this chicanery of strategic maneuvering, is going to end up being just fine. They are all going to withdraw from the world, and I'm going to have to probably chase them down at a later date. We'll see.
I mean, can you imagine that? I honor duel. What? Who's honor dueling me? Then the locust runs out from behind the building. He's like, wait, what? There's nothing honorable about that. He just ran out of an alley and stabbed him in the back.
Actually, that's how most of Miyamoto Musashi's kills were.
Stabbing people in the back?
Well, he ran out of concealment and stabbed him with his sword before. That's why he went to bamboo swords.
Ah. I don't know much about Musashi. I just know that, I mean, I had his book for his...
Book of Five. Yeah, I keep trying to read it and
It's pretty dry.
it stalls.
It's like Sun Tzu. It's half of it's interesting, the other half is about how much you should spend on some pigs, how much rice. It's like, this isn't relevant to me. Saxon, he's the same way. He's like, look, wear your hat like this. This is the equipment that a soldier should have in the field. Look, I don't care about 17th century fighting practices.
Read Strategy by B.H. Littleheart.
B.H. Littleheart. I've never heard of it.
Yeah, interesting.
Any other shots?